Hello everyone, Ian Cold here. So in this video I'm just going to go over a few general things I've learned, some things I would do again, things maybe I would do differently for this project, and I hope that this helps some people maybe looking to start their own projects or maybe just looking for some interesting things to think about. So the one thing that's definitely helped me out with Over Yandere was software testing or unit testing. So for Over Yandere, I have about 136 unit tests right now. So they're essentially all revolving around the dialogues for the game, the school section part of the game, because the free roam part has more to do with the player object interacting with different things in that, general environment. So I can't really isolate things. So unit testing is basically you have a function. This function takes inputs, maybe that's nothing, and it gives outputs, and you're making sure the outputs are correct given the inputs. So for a calculator, if you give it 1 and 1 and you tell it to add, 2 should come out. That seems pretty simple, and you think, well, maybe I can manually test that and it'll be fine. Well, I thought that too, until I started doing the testing for my dialogues. So I wrote down on paper all the dialogue paths I wanted and everything, and I thought they were all set up. But then I went back and I started unit testing the dialogues and getting the endings, and I realized, actually, I had changed my mind on some of the dialogue paths or some of the endings, or I added new endings that I wanted, and I didn't update the code, things like that. And then I was able to add the tests, and they all passed once I made those fixes. And then now I have those, and another good thing about unit tests, not only will they let you know for certain that something is working, but they're also a good guard against regression. So when you change something or add something, maybe in a different part of the game that you don't think will affect something else, but it does, that could cause a problem. And if you don't have these unit tests, you might find it much later when it's already caused a lot of other problems, and maybe you built more features on those problems without knowing it. So that's really helped me, and I have 2 tests failing right now. One of them has to do with the dialogue expansion, so because there's those additional dialogues, it's saying, hey, this new one isn't something we expected. That's fine, I just haven't updated those tests yet, and I'll be looking to do that. But, little things like that, right? I added some new dialogues, and I wasn't thinking, oh, hey, I'm currently getting dialogues at random from this folder. But that test was set up to check for that, and so it's there to remind me, hey, there's this thing, you should look into this and fix it if necessary. In this case, that's fine, but if this was something a little more serious, that reminder could save me a lot of time and a lot of pain and a lot of confusion. So I would definitely recommend, if your game engine or code editor doesn't come with a unit testing or something framework, I would definitely recommend it. Installing it as a plugin or an add-on or whatever system your software uses. It will save you a lot of time. I know it might feel like you're wasting time not developing new features. Trust me, I understand it, but it will save your life the longer the project goes on. Another thing I encountered with Over Yandere was a bug with the dialogue. So the plugin I have for the dialogue. So in some contexts, the dialogue plugin just skips the first line for what reason I don't know. So a lot of the dialogue lines, the first line is repeated, and this is just how a lot of the dialogues are. This is usually at the start of like a paragraph or kind of a section, but that's just how it is, how it's up and working. And there's recently been an update, software update to that plugin. So kudos to that plugin's creator that that bug was fixed, but that fix came out far too late, and I've already built so much of the game based on that bug that upgrading to fix the bug will now cause me other bugs. So that's neither here nor there, but little things like that's something that cost me a lot of time, and now if I had that, it would have saved me, but oh well. Everything's up and working, and it's good, but that's the one thing maybe I would have done differently, is I wouldn't have just put up with that bug. I would have maybe used something else and set things up differently. So that's the one thing I would recommend is, for getting plugins or add-ons that can help you, make sure you have a criteria. Make sure you know what you want it to do, what you need it to do. Make sure you try it out in little bits and pieces to make sure that everywhere you need it to work and everything you need it to do, it will work without any trade-offs or any problems. Or if there are problems, you have a workaround for it that can scale and will grow with the project. So that's something I would have done a bit differently, is how I selected. I would have taken more time in selecting and vetting the plugins and things I've used for the game. This one is a little more picky, I guess. So this one is bad code habits, I guess. So there's two main kinds of ways to write variables in code. One is snake case, so words separated by underscores, and another one is camel case, where each word after the first one, you capitalize the first letter, and there's no spaces between them. There's no right or wrong for these two. It's really just the choice of style. But the problem is I ended up mixing them up, because in my personal projects, I use one, and for my work, I use another. So I kind of got mixed up in the head for switching between work and this project. And so throughout the code, there's the mixed casing. So sometimes when I go to type something out, I type it with one casing, and it says, no, that doesn't exist because you use the other one. So little things like that, just whatever you do, whatever you choose to do, just make sure you make it consistent, so that way not only can you remember what you named things, but you can remember how you wrote things, so you're not having to spend all that time going back and double checking, what did I name that again, how did I put it? And another thing is about dry. So dry is another programming thing. It stands for don't repeat yourself. So if you're using the same bit of code, even if it's just 2 lines, over and over again, try to make that function or something, have it in one place, and then reuse it everywhere. This way, when you want to make changes to how that's working, you go to one place as opposed to 100 little ones. And you don't have to change each one specifically to it. And another thing was for the time tracking and like the music system for the game. There's a few little exceptions to how the music system works. So if I'm going to change how the music system works or how a certain song is playing, like for instance the sprint sound, I would have to change it in a few different places instead of just one general music node or script, things like that. Now for this project that is pretty much as large as it's going to be, I might add a few little things, but I'm not going to greatly expand what this is. There's not going to be too much more complexity for this. It'll be fine. I can read the code, I know what's going on, but for much larger projects, more longer term projects, you're going to want to keep things consistent, have everything in one place, because these little, wait, where am I doing this again? Things like that can really mess you up, especially if you're working with other people, and other people would think, where would I look for this? Why is this being done like this? And that can cause a lot of issues, especially if they just don't want to change it. and then you have something called lava code, which is essentially there's code that is bad or not the best it could be, but nobody wants to touch it or change it because they're afraid of breaking it. So then if something ends up breaking it, no one has any idea how to fix it or what's going on. So coding habits, dry, things like that, those are some things I would change. And one of the things that kind of dragged me into those bad habits was actually trying to get features out, making new features, adding new NPCs, things like that. Those things are exciting. Those things are great. Those are things I want to do. But like proofreading myself, double checking this, making sure, I'm using all of this, or I have to go back and rewrite this code because I didn't use the right casing. Those are things that aren't really fun. So I kind of pushed those off in favor of getting things out faster. And again, for this project, because it's just me and it's essentially about as large as it will be, I'm not going to run into too many issues. But if I was going to continue this much larger, bring on more people, things like that, that might kind of pile up kind of a technical debt in the long term. So that's the one thing, however you write it, stay consistent and try and have one system for everything. If you're going to change how the music works, change it in one place, not a dozen, because as the project grows, that dozen will become 2 dozen, 4 dozen, and before you know, it'll be really messy and it'll cause you a lot more headaches than it's worth. So that's something I would change, is I'd try and keep things consistent. Maybe the project would be a little behind schedule right now, but it might be a little bit easier to work on. And then another thing, probably my biggest recommendation, and I've mentioned in an update how this saved my life. So, version control. Now, this is more of a code thing. At least I've seen it used more for code, but it doesn't have to be. So Git is a form of version control. So essentially you add it into a folder and it saves a snapshot of all those files. Now this snapshot doesn't take up much of any memory whatsoever. Don't worry about performance. It's very, very fast and efficient. And you can save the different versions of your work. So if you have a Word document, you start with a blank, maybe that's one version, then you add another paragraph, then you add another paragraph, and then you think, wait, I want to go back. I don't like this paragraph. Or, there's a problem with this document, I need to go back to when I just finished the first one. You can go back to that first one. Now, you do have to manually set those up, so, each day once you're complete what you're doing, maybe make a commit, that's what it's called, saving that version, and then you can go back to it later. So, as I've mentioned, this system, I use Git for version control. There are some others out there, but Git is a big one. It's fast, it's easy, and it's open source and free. So, the only downside to using it is a little bit of a learning curve, but again, it saved this project's life because I was saving those different versions, and then I made a change that I didn't think would crash the project and the game engine, but I did. So I was able to go to Git, which works outside of your editor or game engine, and I was able to reset all the game's files in an instant to a previous version of those files without my changes, without the tiles I added to the free roam that caused the crash, and all of a sudden I was able to get up and running again. So if you're just working on the project yourself, you know what you're doing, things like that, this is more of a last ditch kind of, save or backup. And again, this is outside of the engine, but I would definitely recommend this, even if you're not intending on crashing things unexpectedly. I don't think anyone does. It also protects you against some other things. So the computer I'm currently working on for this game, I've had this computer a little while. let's say this computer were to spontaneously die, or I drop it in the bathtub somehow, and it's dead, right? I can't use it anymore. Any of the project files on it are essentially gone. Well, I'd be okay, because with Git, you can create a free GitHub account and back up your project to GitHub, and then you can essentially, from any computer, as long as you remember your account and credentials, you can get your last saved progress onto any other computer. So it can also protect you in the case of that. So for that kind of general backup, I would definitely recommend it. Another thing is, if you're going to have people working with you, it can also help, because there's something called branches, which is a little bit of a bigger topic. I'm not going to get too much into that now, but basically you and your friend can both work on the game and do different things at the same time, work each in your own branch, and then when you're both done, you can do what's called merging those branches, where basically you keep only the changes to certain files that you want. So if your friend added some more NPCs in Hammertown while you added a new town somewhere else, if you merge those changes and they're in different files, then there won't be any issue, and then your friend's work and your work that you did on two different computers can be merged and made into one project you can work off of seamlessly. Now, you might run into some merge conflict issues. Now, those are a different topic, but it's still going to be a big help for, allowing more people to work on the project so you don't have to wait for other people to finish. Now, Git is something you'll definitely have to learn, especially for branches, things like that. But at the very least, to have that backup, that life-saving thing in case, who knows what happens, I think that alone is worth it. And I can personally say it saved this project's life not that long ago. So I would definitely recommend Git to anyone, really, for any project, even like an art project, animation, anything. It's simple. If you have a project with files that could, vanish into thin air if something were to happen, then Git is a good idea. So I talked about this next one a little bit in a previous update, but my decision to go with Godot. So Godot was the engine I messed around with quite a bit before I started this project, so I already had some experience with it. I dabbled a little bit in Unity, but it's a bit of a learning curve coming from Godot. But why I really started learning it in the first place was honestly the licensing. So, Unity, if you're going to do, more professional things with it, you're going to make games to sell, you will probably need a paid license. And, for me, making games where, making a profit is a question, not a yes, that wasn't something I really felt comfortable with. That was just me at that time. So that's part of why I went with Godot, was that licensing. But I know Godot is not the only game engine out there. There's, Unity, there's GDevelop, there's Unreal, and, every person's decision is different. So choose the one for you. I'm not going to say Godot is the best there ever will be. I would recommend it if you just want my, recommendation, because it has that good ecosystem. You can edit the engine and recompile it with different features for more advanced users, things like that. And of course, there's that no licensing, so any money you make off of a game or app you make with it, you can keep, no questions. But that's just me. If you want to go with Unity, that's perfectly fine. It's really just a choice. As long as you make it and you're confident with it, no problem. Just as long as you keep up with changes to the engine. So one thing for this project is I had worked with Godot 3, which is a major version, and in it you could do .wav files for audio, and you could load them dynamically in code. So I could write the code that when something happens, you switch the audio. in Godot 4, at least my version, I set up MP3s because Godot 4 can now work with MP3s, but I wasn't able to set up the dynamic switching in code, so I actually have several different audio players with different MP3s, and I just switch between those objects in my code. It's a little bit different, and it's not too easy to explain in a quick little update like this, but it's a little bit clunky, and it's something that maybe I would change, or maybe if I were to refactor the project, I'd go back and see if I can change that, maybe with a newer version of Godot now that it's probably out, things like that. And the last thing I want to mention is similar to the bad code habits, but more in general, is about the organization of the images and assets and the project. So I have a big folder called assets. Inside of that assets folder, I have characters, I have images, I have audio, and inside of those folders I have more and more, and so on. Now, the thing where it gets complicated is I have one folder called tile set images and another called interactable images. But sometimes the tile set image and the interactable image are the same, because I need to use this tile both as a tile and as something you can interact with. So for instance, some blocks of a certain thing you don't interact with, but there's one little hidden thing that you do. In that case, I need to put that in both folders or put it in one and use it in both game objects. That gets a little bit interesting. Another thing is, again, I may have, focused more on getting features out than perfect organization practices. So I have some folders for some of the buildings. Music store has its own folder, pharmacy has its own folder, but the library actually doesn't. It just has a couple images in the general tile set images folder, and that's it. And again, for this game, it's not that large, not too many buildings, I can keep track of everything in my head. It's not that bad. But again, keeping track of everything, sometimes I've lost track of some things, different folders, different naming schemes, things like that. So making a rule for myself and really taking the extra time to make sure everything is organized as it should be, and figuring out ways to organize and keep properly organized maybe slightly complicated things with complicated rules like that, that's something I would change, just to save myself some time. And if I was going to take this project much further, which, I might do a little more development as maintenance after release, that's something that I'll definitely look to do, because it will definitely help out in the long run. So those are some things that I've experienced and learned from throughout the course of my game dev journey with Over Yandere. And I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. I will link to a few different things in the description. So some of the softwares I talked about, I'm not endorsing them, but a lot of the ones I'm going to share are free and open source. So if you want to check them out, you can check them out. And I would recommend them, especially Git. But yeah, so those are some things that have helped me with this project, some things I would change, some things you should be careful of. And that's it. So, thank you for watching. I know this video is probably going to be pretty long, but I hope you learned something. See you next time.